and he's going to score Bristol's third try.
What a
but
try.
what great play
fantastic.
by Augustine Pichon.
And Bristol have made a bit of history, winning the European Challenge Cup for the first time ever.
And Bristol have won. They won the local derby.
You're listening to Bears Beyond the Gate, a Bristol Bears podcast made by fans for fans, with 2.5 season card holders at Ashton Gate who love the club, the game and all things Bears. Well, a little bit different today, as we aren't going to be releasing a preview of the Saints game and the Premiership restart in general until later in the week. So instead, for your early week commute, we've got the second of our Bears Beyond the Gate docu-pods, following on from the one we did recently with the Bears Supporters Advisory Committee. So today I have an interview with Paul Morgan, who is the Communications Lead of Premier Women's Rugby. Previous to that, he was Communications Director at Premier Rugby for 10 years, and before that he was the editor of Rugby World magazine. Paul talks to us about the rise of the recent rebrand, I should say, of Premier Women's Rugby with regards to being called the Premier Women's League, and how that fits into a 10-year strategy for growing the game to be the most successful domestic league in the world. He also talks a little bit about dealing with Bristol Bears behind the scenes and gives us a little bit of an insight in what goes on there. And finally, he gives us some thoughts, I should say, on where he sees rugby in general going, given the challenges that it has faced in recent times. So sit back, listen, and enjoy.
Okay, so Paul, thanks so much for coming on Bears Beyond the Gate tonight. It is much appreciated. You are currently the Communications Lead for Premiership Women's Rugby, or the PWR, as I'm sure it's known. But it's fair to say that you've kind of been in and around the world of rugby for quite a long time.
Yeah, I have, going back really into the early 90s when I was at Richmond and Twickenham Times. And that time we had 4 first-class clubs in our area. We had London Irish, London Welsh, London Scottish, Harlequins, and we even had Rosslyn Park just around the corner as well. So it was a real rugby hotbed at that time, that newspaper. So, while it wasn't necessarily a desire of mine or part of my career to be a rugby journalist, being in that area, you almost couldn't avoid it. So it led me really to be a rugby journalist, and went to a sports reporting agency called Haters, and then on to Rugby World magazine, where I was lucky enough to be editor for around about 12 years. And obviously that led me into communications, where I worked at Premiership Rugby for just over a decade, and now landed at the PWR, as you've said. So it feels like a bit of a whirlwind, but it was, in all honesty, to be the editor of Rugby World at a time when England, were so preeminent and winning a World Cup, and Lions won in South Africa was incredible, really. And obviously England haven't done quite as well since. And I think if you'd told me in 2003 that they'd only win one more Grand Slam, I'd have thought you were, you need your head read. But so it was a great time for many reasons to be, you can tell from my accent I am Welsh, but when England are good and when England are winning, it certainly lifted Rugby World, and it would have lifted a lot of the media. And you've only got to see how the country's been lifted since the weekend performance against Ireland. They are one of those teams that can really galvanise a nation. So yeah, brilliant times, ups and downs, but some absolutely brilliant times. And I've been so lucky to have been involved in what is an amazing game for so long. I think I've often called it the best team game in the world, and I've not really found one that's better.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure you probably in 2003 wouldn't have thought that 20 years later, perhaps you were involved in a professional women's league, perhaps. And
No.
It's interesting how careers go. But let's talk about that. So the PWR, I mean, obviously it was a kind of a rebranded or relaunched league this season out the back of the Premier 15s with 10 teams. I mean, for what I did a little bit of research. What I read was there's now a kind of a new executive team, a 10-year strategy with the aim of becoming the world's most competitive, progressive, and sustainable domestic competition. And I guess that now we're we're kind of approaching the business end of the first season, albeit with a bit of a break for the Six Nations. So how would what's your kind of end of term report in terms of successes, and what do fans, what fans of the women game going to look forward to in the future?
Well, I suppose I could take a quick step back if I can, because you're quite right. It's a new independent organisation in many ways that was formed last July. But I've got to say that the RFU have done an incredible job with women's rugby up to that point, right? That they created a template that every other nation wants to follow, and commentators will tell everybody they need to be like England, which is no mean feat. But from within the RFU, they wanted it to create what they called a new co, but the RFU are still very much involved, and one of their directors, Alex Teasdale's on our board, and is a really big influential voice. And I think one of the things when I wanted to come to work for them, one of the things I really did like was that link to the Red Roses. The link to mean that we really want the Red Roses to do well, and we want them to win the World Cup. Obviously, it's in England, so it will be a huge benefit to the league. But that connection is unbreakable, really. So I really like that, because I like the idea that we are, as a league, we're far from a development league for the national team, and you can see how hard fought the league is this season. But we are very much we got that. We work really hand in hand with the RFU, whether it comes to medical, player, even from my side on media and comms, and that makes for a really good relationship. So I think part of the strength of it is that. And look, first season, it was difficult to make estimations at the start, but I think you're going to judge yourself on lots of different ways, really. Competitiveness is really important for the league. We're going now into the sort of final rounds with 3 teams with only 4 points between them at the top of the table. So we don't know who's going to win the league. We don't know who's going to be in the semi-finals yet. So, which is a great place to be. We've seen our clubs. We've seen a number of our clubs. We saw Harlequins create a new world record at Christmas. We've seen other clubs make attendance records. We've had good crowds at the Bears, which I know obviously that's a team you support, look after, and when the last game against Lightning on that Friday night was a really terrific. We had Andy Scarrett back, which helped. We had the Queen of Rugby back, so that really helped. But I mean, it was a really, really good occasion. So I think it's about inspiring that next generation. I think if we could do anything, we could say to young girls, this is a sport for you to watch, to play, to officiate, to administer, whatever you want. And I think that's one of the kind of key things for the future, that we want to be able to be that organisation that can inspire people to come and get involved in rugby. There've been many tough headlines that rugby's had to suffer in the last 4 or 5 years, but the women's game's been a shining light. And when it comes to participation levels, and anyone listening to this who's involved in a grassroots club knows how young girls and women have come into their club in the last 2 or 3 years and brought a whole new dimension to it. And participation numbers are up. And when you see the Red Roses games and, a lot of the Premiership games, they're really joyful occasions. No quarter given on the pitch, but they're really joyful occasions, and we love that. So it is a case of so far so good. I have to keep reminding people in the office, we actually only started the league in the middle of November, so we've barely done 4 months yet. Feels like 4 years, but so we are still starting. We're still growing. The other thing that's really important for any new sport and any new league is a television proposition. We need people to see it. We need people to tune in or turn up. Okay, so having TNT Sports come on board last summer was really, really important for us, because we've got that match every weekend now on that channel, and they have been incredible partners as well. So I think what you do find quite quickly is a lot of people want to be helpful and supportive of women's sport at the moment. I don't know, 10, 20 years ago, men might have laughed behind their hand at women's sport, but now that's pretty much gone now. And people want to be really supportive. So TNT, while women's rugby is obviously still quite a small sport, they want to be really supportive of it. And we had from within a sort of comms and I guess a promotional perspective, when we looked at the season, we wanted to make a lot of noise at the start. We wanted to make a lot of noise in the middle of the men's Six Nations when we had that fallow week with our superpower weekend, which we did a little while ago, which again went well. And again, TNT Sports really came forward to support that show. 2 live games that weekend. We had 2 more that were broadcast on YouTube. So we, that's raising the profile of women's sport, and, really believing in it as a concept is just what we do every day, really. And, when I was at Rugby World magazine, I started covering women's rugby when it hadn't really been covered before. I was very proud that I put Paula George, the England captain, around about 2000, 2002, on the cover of the magazine in the run-up to 2002 World Cup. First woman ever to be on the cover. Since it's just normal now. And this month's cover of Rugby World, which I love every month, it's got Ellie Kilden and Jess Breach on it. So it's now kind of commonplace. But back 20 years ago, it was a big step for us to take. I can tell you, there was a lot of soul searching in the office when we decided to do it, or certainly around us. So So look, we it's so far so good. We feel certainly up to this point, season 1's been a real success. Feels like a real great buzz. It feels like real talkability around the league. Having new teams in as well. It'd be brilliant to see the Tigers there. Sale Sharks representing the North, and all they bring their first game at the Salford Stadium. Some of your listeners will have known it as the AJ Bell at the weekend. Yeah. And that was absolutely fantastic. And, you've got an incredible owner up there, Michelle Orange, and that Northern Rugby Matters campaign they're doing, it really means something. It means a lot. They're not just words. And they obviously had a record crowd last weekend for that game. So it feels like lots of great things are happening across all our clubs. As I say, you look at Leicester Tigers are now, right in the middle of it. We've got, Lightning, which bring a whole new dimension again. Their link with the Saints has been fantastic. Having Trailfinders in as a new team with Giselle Mather, who's one of not just the leading women's coaches in the world, but one of the leading coaches in the world in our league. It's all, it's a lot of positivity around at the moment, a lot of buzz, and a lot of, as I say, talkability, and we're loving being in the middle of it.
Wow, that's brilliant. No, it's really interesting to hear, and I mean, I'm interested to hear what you said about how you've had a lot of support from the kind of existing, I guess, rugby structures. But it strikes me that you've also got an opportunity here, as almost with a clean slate, to create a kind of slightly different identity for the women's game, and maybe not follow some of the avenues that the men's professional game went down, and I don't know, I guess things like maybe sponsors or promotions or things like that.
Yeah. And we've got to be careful about things like salaries as well. And we want the game to grow really fast, but we must make sure it's sustainable from a financial perspective as well. That is really, really important. And we need, and that will, and that's again where the, that link back to the RFU works, because the Red Roses are now on full-time contracts. Many of those higher profile women are doing sponsorship campaigns, and they're on billboards, and, exactly where Marley Packer and Ellie Kilden and Emma Singh and and Amber Reid should be, really, but they should have been there 20 years ago, but they never were. So we're starting to see them break through into those other areas now as well. And I was really interested to see that there was some sponsorship awards this week, and O2, who've been incredible supporters of rugby, they won a reward for their women's sponsorship, which again, is a great testament. There's just a lot of good things are going in the right direction. We're never complacent, never thinking everything's going to work. But, and as I was mentioning some of those characters, that it is hugely down to the clubs wanting to commit to a women's programme. I mean, if anyone's lucky enough to go down to see the Bears training ground and to see that the women are on an even par there, and look, they've got a coach who could easily coach in the men's game in Dave Ward. They've got someone, they've got people of a real high standard right across that club. They're a good example, really, of how a commitment to women's sport will really pay dividends. And obviously this season, I've been down to Shaftesbury Park a couple of times. Obviously they've got the women's football team in the in the WSL, haven't they, at
Yeah.
Ashton Gate quite a lot. But when we get to Ashton Gate, we know that's such a special place for anyone. And, as I was mentioning, that Friday night game recently was a really, really, really special occasion. But to be honest, I went down to Shaftesbury Park to watch them play Gloucester, and I quite enjoyed my night there. It sort of reminds me a little bit about why I fell in love with rugby. It's a lovely ground, and it was absolutely packed to the rafters that night as well. And there were 3 or 4 deep around the pitch. And that side of it means that, so it's a lot of good news, and it got a lot of positivity. But as I say, it isn't really. We'll work as hard as we can and never be outworked in the centre. But it's down to the clubs. It's down to Saracens. It's down to Chiefs. It's down to Trailfinders. It's down to Quins to actually, and they're the ones that are making the ground, and they're the ones that are committing to women's sport predominantly, and doing a great job. And it feels like we're going in a good direction at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure you have to be brutally independent and objective in your role. But I mean, what do you think about the Bears? We seem to be peaking quite well at the moment, and pushing for maybe, if we're lucky, we might push for just get that home semi-final playoff spot. But what's your take on our club?
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm they're like, I've got 9 children, haven't I? So I can't favour any of them. What I always say is, I'd like the battle of the semi-finals to go to the very last minute of the very last game. I'd like the final to go to the very last minute as well, and go into injury time and not know the result. So, but taking that on, the Bears win at the weekend really did transform that, because if they'd lost to Saracens, which they'd lost the last 12 times to them, so why wouldn't they? They'd have been, I think, 6 behind, and that's a lot to make up. Against, and I think Saracens had a game in hand as well. So that win just really transformed that top 4. And actually, I was on a Zoom call with Dave Ward today, and he never stopped smiling the whole of the call. So I think it's really given the club a bit of a boost as well. And all those players, I remember Will Green was saying this about when England had a big win in New Zealand. I think you can always be in the dressing room now and say we've beaten Saracens. Okay, they are their most successful club, and back in the day, from the vision that Nigel Ray had at Saracens, and the way that club has supported women's sport, and they've got a netball team. They've been incredible. So to beat them means that you can feel I can beat anyone now. And Bristol, signed some really clever signings in the summer. Ollie Aitchison's been terrific. Anna Bottomans a sort of player you can build a whole team around. So you're looking at the top 4 now, thinking, well, actually, any of them could really now make a sprint for the line in those last 4 rounds. So yeah, it's really opened it up. It's strange, isn't it? You feel like one result doesn't change much, but it was almost like because we've got the break now, it was almost like they scored in the in the 44 in the 39th minute of the match to go ahead. So it's not quite half time, I know, but they scored late on, and they now gone into the dressing rooms thinking we can do this. So I'm really going to be interested to see if they can carry that on in that's to say, not quite the second half of the season, because we played much more than half, but in that last phase really. So it'll be really, really interesting.
Yeah, no, I think there is definitely a buzz about the women's game this season, and the fact they took a couple of the games to Ashton Gate, like you said, it was Sale early on, and Lightning with Emily Scarrett. As you said, I went down with my daughter, and I was quite, it was quite exciting to see her, and you can see what absolute class player she was. Even she was just coming back. So yeah, no, it's all really interesting. I mean, one of the things that I was going to ask you about Bristol, I mean, it's mainly about both the teams, but as a communications man, I mean, what do you think about our social media team? Because they have a pretty good reputation, I think, as and they've been pushing the women as well, doing loads of little social media stuff.
No, it's fantastic. And I suppose for me, I had a little bit, I get a glimpse behind the curtains sometimes, and whether your listeners know the names of the people behind the scenes, but it was all really started off with Tom Tainton right back in the day, and carried on by Will Carpenter. And it's if you had a league of any league, you'd want everyone to be like the Bears, wouldn't you? You want on social. And I think they just look across the board. The club is set standards for everyone in the community. Their work in the community is exemplary, preeminent, do fantastic work there. And because I suppose mainly because they've got a really brilliant owner who's willing to back them in these areas. And the social's the same. we can't. It's a really serious game on the pitch, but we can't take ourselves too seriously off it, and we need to be able to just, we need to be able to poke fun a little bit. And recently, I knew they'd do something on World Book Day, but I didn't know what they were going to do. And then they end up doing all their new signings in different books, and that's just fantastic. And that's not something I've seen before, but I knew they'd do something. So they've done that, and I think certainly when I was working the men's game, you could see the other teams responding to that. And again, let's have a little bit of fun, because especially if we're trying to, as all sports are, in trying to draw in a younger audience, they need to know that rugby is fun, and if they come along to Ashton Gate on a Friday night or a Saturday, they're going to enjoy it, and it's going to, and there's going to be things going on, and they've done, lots of things, innovative things, camera on the bench, and various other things. The list will be endless of what they've done. So I love them, and would hope they never stop and carry on even more. And yes, and again from my side, and I know as well they're just so great with the media, and they're so great with opening themselves up. We on the call today we were talking about how Dave Ward has gone on TNT Sports with about 10 or 15 minutes to go before a game. He's done it twice now, which is, for a director of rugby, well, he's the head coach, to do that is a real commitment, because you can imagine with 10 or 15 minutes before a game, he's got a lot on his plate and he's got a lot to do. But for him to prioritise that, so I think they always want to be asked to do things, and they always try their best to say yes. So yes, so I've loved working with them for many years, and switching over to the women's side, nothing's really changed, and they've got some great people, other great people at the club behind the scenes as well. Their general manager Daisy's fantastic. They've got some really good people behind the scenes in that club, and I can safe to say that it's in very good hands.
I've noticed that the latest media star is Dave and Abby's daughter. She was I think when they were doing the Blackbird on Sunday, she's definitely got pride of place there. But we were quite concerned. It looked like she had a junior dry robe on actually when she was doing it. But we're not sure.
I'll have to mention that. But look, you've mentioned it there, and I feel very remiss of me that I mentioned it already myself. That is one of the great stories, isn't it? A woman again, that happened 20 years ago. Abby is. Again, she is a thought leader in this space. She has defined the RFU's maternity policy for the players. She's gone off. She's had a baby. She's come back. And when she was telling me, she was part of a big photo shoot we did to kick off the season called Power Differently. And when she was there saying she was going to make it back the first game, having had children, I couldn't believe it, really. How on earth can you do this? She comes back. It's not only she played in the first game, they win. He scores a try as well. So, and that's carried on as well. And I'm full of, I couldn't have more admiration for Abby Ward if I tried, really. And obviously it's as anyone who's had children knows it's a partnership. So Dave will be in there as well. But it's literally one of the great stories of this season. And I'm glad she's had quite a bit of attention for it and quite a bit of praise for it, because she really deserves it. And now she's back in the England squad as well. So I don't know what she'd probably climb Mount Everest in the summer or something. But,
maybe Prime Minister, who knows?
She could do, whatever. She can do anything she wants. So, again, rugby's really lucky. And I'm sure they're probably set other sports to say the same. We've got some really brilliant people in our sport. Amber Reid's another one who's been at the Bears a long time, who's a great person. Lots of really good people at the club. The club's got 2 doctors in it as well. And I recently did an interview with I was a sort of go-between Simi Pam, an American magazine who wanted to do a piece on people who played sport but then had a job as well, and can't much better than Simi being a doctor. So that was a really good one. They've just got people just across the board, just mention names and all the time, and they're just, you're finding great people. But Abby, she say whatever she wants to do next, she'll do it, because she's done that. She's already broken so many barriers. But another brilliant story of being involved in communications. Of course, all I'm about is brilliant stories and storytelling, and Abby's does that. And it created a real, again, incredible buzz and talkability, and we even managed to squeeze her onto the cover of the Telegraph Sport Monthly in November with a balletic pose. So yeah, great people, and club is full of them, and the league is full of them as well. So it's you could reel them off at any club really, but Bristol certainly got some special ones.
No, that's brilliant. Well, look, I mean, I got you on really just to talk about the women's game and the Bears, but obviously prior to working at the PWR, you were the comms director at Premier Rugby. So I thought it's a good opportunity for me just to ask you a more general question. I mean, we all know as fans, been following rugby a long time. It's been an up and down time for Premier. Ironically, when the game is almost as exciting at times as it ever has been. So, I mean, I guess my question to you is, in your time there, I think you said you were there for a decade. What would you say was your kind of your greatest achievements? And then the second question, sort of linked to that, is, what do you think now you're detached from it? What do you think has to be done to essentially kind of stabilise and then grow the men's or the domestic game again?
Yeah, look, I don't think you can look back on that decade without, first of all, expressing, I suppose, the devastation we all felt and was felt by the fans, the players, everyone involved in those three clubs. I mean, anyone who supports a sports team, to have that taken away from them, it's almost hard to describe what feeling that could be, and certainly the sport, especially in a way the ones from Worcester, because it seemed to be that they were sort of, we heard from them more in a sense, but doesn't mean that the London Irish or Wasps weren't. But it was complete devastation inside and outside. But obviously we had to get on with running the league then, and it was not a time you'd ever wish on anybody. And I still have heartfelt feelings for certainly the fans, the players, and the staff of those three clubs. And it feels like certainly Wasps feel like they are coming back, and it feels like they're making lots of positive noises, which personally, I'd obviously love to see them, back in the top flight. I watched Wasps at Loftus Road. I watched them in Wickham. I watched them in the Rico as it then became, and then changed names after that. Same for Worcester. I used to love my trips to Six Ways. Same for London Irish. They're a local club to mine. So yeah, devastating really. But I think it feels to me that. It still feels to me there still can be some positivity within the league. I think you've got no choice really. You have to make it positive, and we've seen this season. The English game has obviously is a little maligned, isn't it, by the Celts, certainly, of which I am one. But it's still, the Premiership is still very exciting. And we've seen that already this season. The recent Derby Day weekend was really, really successful. We saw the crowds come back again. They've seen clubs coming up again. Bath, I know, won't have many fans on this podcast, but having Bath at the back at the top of the table is fantastic for the league. Saints the same. Those are big clubs with big followings, and so we have to think the future will be bright. I think there will be a relaunch, and I think we have to think the future will be bright. I just really hope. I really hope that at some point that the future includes those three clubs, because I don't want to see that. I don't think, I think they can still come back, and I really hope they do. I think the people involved at Premiership Rugby now are the right people to take it forward. I think the owners group, who are crucial, are still passionate about their clubs, passionate about the leagues, and there feels to be, lots of good things happening. If Bath get their ground. Get their new ground, that would be incredible. Obviously the Bears are in an amazing stadium anyway. They built their incredible training ground. So yeah, I don't necessarily want to go back over all those bits, but it was a devastating time. And but as I say, it was no more the most devastating time for fans, staff, and players at those clubs really. So my heart went out to them at the time, and it still does. But it feels like there's still an opportunity to be positive about the league this season, and I think the structure as well. This is the first season, I think, where we've had a structure that's beneficial to club and country. You know, one of the things that was always brought up in my time was, oh, Owen Farrell only plays for Saracens 10 times a season, and you know, and all your big players go, you know, at the wrong time, and Callum Sheedy gets called here, and Harry Randall gets called there, and they don't play for their club. So I think while it's been a little bit of a culture shock, I think for fans, and you mentioned there hasn't been much going on, to have this gap, what it's going to mean is, I think the back end of the season will be much bigger than it would have been. And I think the players, you know, in the future will play more often for their clubs, which was always the thing that was the biggest criticism, really. So I think this season structure will start to work its way through. And it, you know, it feels like if everything gets off the ground, that the Nations Cup that will happen, you know, that will tie together the July matches and the autumn internationals, and then there won't be what we would always call the overlaps, as many as there were. So I think that's, again, coming a little bit of a culture shock to fans who are like, well, I don't know what I'm going to do this week, but obviously the way that our season structured, they can come and watch the PWR when they're not watching the men, and we know a lot of people did in that Superpower weekend. So yeah, look, you can only be positive about the future. You have to be, really. You can't look back. You have to look forward. And yeah, I'm passionate about rugby, and I know it'll have a good future because there's so many great people involved in it. There's so many great clubs, so many great institutions involved in it, that I know it will have to have a good future. Future might look completely different to now, you know, and there are many challenges, player welfare being one of them. But I think it will have a good future.
No, it's interesting. I mean, the last thing I was thinking of actually is that the big debate, I guess, at the moment is the sort of salary cap debate. I think Bristol are very much on the, you know, raise the salary cap camp, back your product type thing, and obviously there are other clubs that are, you know, maybe more, you know, for various reasons, don't want to raise it because of the risks that comes. And I mean, that's a kind of another podcast probably debating that.
It is, yeah.
But it is one of those dilemmas, is that, you know, do you build your product by backing your product and bringing in, I mean, you know, look at marquee players like Charles Piatow and Sammy Radradra, who were I know at times Bristol were kind of sometimes unfairly maligned as kind of moneybags bears, but you think, you know, we brought those players in, I believe it was for the good of the league, as much as that was the whole point of the marquee. And it's an interesting one, but maybe we'll leave that to another time. So I think we better call it a night, Paul. You've been brilliant. I really appreciate you giving up your time for us, and it's really good to hear from, you know, somebody who is in the middle of it all and has been for such a long time. So, you know, us humble fans, you know, we don't really often get a chance to see it from the other side of the fence.
I think things like podcasts have been fantastic. I love listening to them, and I'm speaking to Jess, who does the Lesser Tigers one soon as well, because you never get a better view of a club than from the fans, really, because they've lived it, and some of them for 20, 30, 40, 50 years they've seen it all. And that's one of the reasons I love social media. You don't necessarily love the criticism, but if you're sensible, you'll sit back and go, do you know what? Actually, I've got a point there. So I think the fan voice is probably, you know, the one thing that has become really, really important in the last 10 years. And I think podcasts and listening to supporters and the channels now that we can have, social media, where we can hear straight away about whether we've had a good idea or a bad idea, are really, really important. And I think it's you know, everyone should pay attention, because they are, you are the ones that know your club probably better than anybody, and certainly will still be there in 20, 30 years time, whoever the players are, whoever's the coaches or whatever, you'll still be going along. So I value it hugely, and I value certainly listening to social media from fan groups, and I, you know, on my Facebook page, I'm probably I think a member of almost all of them. And again, you know, when you're in the centre of it, you're always, when somebody comes out with something, sometimes you're like, oh, but then you think, no, actually, they have got a point. So it's worth listening to, and I enjoy listening to them. So it's been a pleasure to talk to you, and I've really enjoyed chatting to you, and I love it, and you know, I'd urge you to keep going, and let's hope we can get even more.
Yeah, well, if the next time you're down Shaftesbury Park or Ashton Gate, I'll buy you a pint of Thatcher's Maybe I don't know.
That's
Thatcher. Do you think it'd be Thatcher's Gold or Thatcher's Haze that you'd like? I don't know.
Oh, I think I better go. I think I better go for Hayes. I think,
Yeah.
I think so. Only because one of my great mates, a guy called Dom Hayes, used to work with at Premiership Rugby. So I think in his honour, I'd go with that one.
And finally, the final question, that it's one of the most important questions that's often on many people's lips, and we did talk about this off air. But if it was you were down Ashton Gate on a Friday night and it was quite cold, would you ever consider wearing a dry robe to watch rugby?
My daughters would, but I would resist. I think I would definitely resist. I would get those layers on, and I'd be very proud to wear my PWR jacket. Yeah, I would resist the dry robe, but I know what my daughters would be dressed in for certain.
Brilliant answer. That's an answer of a communications man. That's fantastic. So, brilliant. Well, look, Paul, I really appreciate your time, and thanks for coming on Bears Beyond the Gate.